Most of you have probably heard the saying, don't ever assume things. When you assume something, you make an ass out of both you and myself. Now, this goes pretty hand in hand with talking about historical events and even modern events that are happening right now. In fact, something that occurred recently, which many of you probably are aware of unless you've been living under a rock the past several weeks, is partially what inspired me to make this video. Now, it's going to be interesting, and you probably can tell already from the title that discussing neo-Nazi, or rather the Wehrmacht and the innocent Wehrmacht myth, while also discussing the current Russian-Ukrainian conflict, might seem a little bit disconnected at first, but I'll explain why they seem to be connected and why I want to talk about this. Specifically, it comes down to the assumptions that have currently come around when discussing the troops on the ground fighting for Russia. Specifically, them as a moral evil, more or less. I'm the Wolf of 1918, and finally, a recent video of me sitting in front of the camera talking to you guys, I'm going to be discussing a rather important topic that many people don't actually want to talk about with any sense of level-headedness, at least recently. So, there was a myth back in the 1900s after World War II that the only bad apples within Nazi Germany were those of the Nazi Party, the SS, that the Wehrmacht was reasonably clean and simply fighting for their own national defense. This came about for a few reasons. One, because due to the Cold War, the United States and NATO needed an ally in Germany to help fight the Eastern Bloc, specifically the Warsaw Pact. And the way to do that, with the whole Holocaust coming about and the German people seeing militarism and the support of the military in line with the Nazi ideology, was to simply paint the Wehrmacht as better. On top of that, many people from the Wehrmacht were able to write the history and give America the perception that they had on the war as a whole. And so obviously if people write these books are not going to talk about the war crimes that they committed when that could easily end them up in a jail cell or dead. So they pushed all the blame on already dead individuals. Hitler, or those who were killed after the Nuremberg trial or killed themselves before or shortly after. People like Goebbels, Goering, and Himmler. Why this is important and why it's critical to know this is because this myth, questioned for decades, was pretty much dispelled after the 1990s and started to pick up steam in this sort of anti-innocent Wehrmacht. The idea that the Wehrmacht was not innocent was controversial at first. The idea that the Wehrmacht was close to on par with the SS in terms of the amount of war crimes that they committed was extremely controversial. And then it wasn't. And then documents came out showing that they weren't, that they were in fact war criminals, and that the Wehrmacht was not innocent, and they willingly took part in multitudes of war crimes in the East, that they willingly took part in supporting the Holocaust. This has sparked another movement, which is almost wrong in a way similar to that of the innocent Wehrmacht myth. And that is merely that all German soldiers fighting for the Wehrmacht were bad. That merely supporting the Nazi regime was bad, in terms of, just being there and not fighting back. To them, that was bad. These people think that unless you were actively fighting and opposing the Nazi regime, you were thus complacent with the Holocaust and thus a perpetrator of it and guilty by association. This is not good either, because you're taking a bunch of people who we can no longer talk to because they're dead, and saying that they're guilty of being part of the Holocaust merely because they didn't speak up and fight against it. Now, the thing that is boggling my mind is the fact that the people saying this are actively avoiding actually trying to fix problems and human rights violations that are going on now, and are just as complacent as anyone within the Nazi regime not doing anything then. And yet they sit there in their comfort of their homes criticizing the Germans who decided to sit there in the comfort of their homes and not do anything, while these people nowadays are also not doing anything. That's why this is problematic to me, because these people don't actually see the psyche that goes on in it. The fact that I'm comfortable here, why should I actually speak out? It's the whole saying, first they came for the Jews and I didn't speak out. Then they came for da-da-da and I didn't speak, and so on and so forth, until they came after me. And then there was no one left and no one willing. These people who criticize the soldiers of the Wehrmacht, the civilians, the innocents, for merely doing nothing, either because they were brainwashed into buying into the propaganda and legitimately thought that the Nazi regime was fighting a defensive war, or they just did not feel like they could do enough, so they thought that they would just stand by and preserve themselves. Those are the most common types of people that existed within Nazi Germany. Those who knew what was going on but felt like they wouldn't be able to help at all, and that them just getting killed trying to fight back was worthless, so they just stood by in the comfort of their homes, or the relative comfort after the cities got bombed out. And then the people who bought into the propaganda of a defensive war and just denied to themselves that Germany was committing anything bad at all. It's important to realize that most people within Germany during World War II thought that Germany was fighting a defensive war. Most people in the Wehrmacht thought that Germany was fighting a defensive war, and most of these arguments still persist today, especially with the preventive war idea of Germany invading Russia. See, German news outlets portrayed the German invasion of Poland as the Poles attacking Germany first, and then the Germans retaliating. And many Germans believed this idea until the end of the war. Because after Germany invaded Poland, on a stance of we are defending ourselves, Britain and France declared war on Germany. So then there's really no way for the German people to think, oh, Germany's being aggressive here. And then when Germany invaded the Soviet Union, it was the idea of a preventative war, that the Soviet Union was going to break the agreement that they signed and invade Germany. That myth specifically still persists today amongst neo-Nazi circles, and even non-neo-Nazi circles, but merely Wehrabus. So what does this have to do with what I'm talking about? It comes down to the idea that going off and, dispelling the innocent Wehrmacht myth is extremely important. And getting that out of the national psyche and the discussions when it relates to World War II is extremely important. The Wehrmacht was not innocent, and there's too many people who believe that myth and worship the Wehrmacht in terms of this powerful military force when it wasn't. And then they can praise the Wehrmacht with this clean conscience because they think it was innocent, and that only the SS was bad. That's not true. So it's important to dispel that myth. But what's arisen out of the ashes of this innocent Wehrmacht myth is a completely polar opposite on the other extreme that paints every Wehrmacht soldier as evil merely for being associated with the Wehrmacht. This is also not true, especially when you take into account the ideas of conscription, the ideas of people honestly believing the propaganda that they're fighting a defensive war, and the fact that many people joined up because they were pressured by their own family members. There are plenty of wars that have been fought for unjust causes within the United States, and we do not vilify the veterans of those wars because we understand the ideas of conscripts, propaganda, and pressure from family. But it only seems that we understand those concepts when it comes to the troops of our own nations, and not the troops of other nations or other regimes that have long since gone. Now, this is a great example as to why studying history can give us a better perception of what is going on today. The whole saying of history never repeats, but it often rhymes, is a very, very true statement. But the statement of we must learn our history so that we do not repeat it is only true to an extent. Knowing history and knowing what happened in the past can give us a good idea of looking at what is going on now and give us a great basing point to how we should make our decisions. Because then we can see, okay, well, with this going on, I can tell from past historical events that the right decision now is to do this for the maximum safe bet, I guess you could say. That's what learning history is supposed to do. No one knowing a ton of history is going to be able to prevent the repetition or the rhyming that tends to happen with the cycle of humanity. No amount of historical knowledge can. What you can do is you can protect yourself and you can protect a nation if you happen to be someone who runs a nation from falling into the same mistakes of doing those same decisions when that cycle repeats. So when we look at the Ukrainian conflict going on right now, it's very easy to fall into the trap of painting every Russian soldier as some evil, horrible person. Now, I must preface this by saying that Russia is the aggressor here. Russia should not be invading Ukraine. Putin is absolutely evil for what he's doing right now. The fact that they're threatening the world with nuclear annihilation and all these terrible things and trying to blame Ukraine for things that they aren't doing is terrible. It's awful. This whole invasion is awful. There have been videos of Russians shooting civilians. There have been terrible, terrible things going on within Ukraine, and it's terrible, and I hope that it stops as soon as possible. But it becomes very easy when we see Russia doing this and we notice that the Russian government is this terrible, horrible organization and institution that needs to get brought down. And we need to stop the invasion of Ukraine and stop this encroachment on a sovereign nation and their people. It becomes easy when we see that to then paint all the Russian soldiers in the same light. In reality, what we need to do is we need to understand, similar with the Wehrmacht during World War II, that a lot of these soldiers are conscripts. They're forced into military service and they feel like they have to keep going. Or they've been forced into military service and they've bought the propaganda. There are plenty of examples of Russian soldiers who simply don't want to fight and surrender. There's a lot of rumors that the Russian soldiers are sabotaging their own supply lines so they don't have to fight. Yes, there's videos of Russian soldiers committing war crimes against Ukrainian civilians. At the same time, there are a couple videos that have circulated of Ukrainians doing similar things to refugees. And again, this is war. There's a lot of fog going on, and it's very difficult to tell what's happening. And it's obvious that the Russians are on the wrong side here, that we need to be really going after them with sanctions to just stop this conflict. But it's also important to realize, and I'm going to reiterate this, we cannot be taking this hatred out on the average Russian citizen or the average Russian soldier. We seem to have just this endless supply of forgiveness when it comes to the veterans of past foreign wars in America where we were completely in the wrong. Because we go, they were conscripted. There was a lot of propaganda. It was easy to see that. But when it comes to another nation, that's where that grace stops. And I feel like that sort of double standard needs to end, especially when relating to a country like Russia, which has an extremely strong state media and an extremely strong propaganda arm. It's a common statement to say that Germany might have lost World War II, but they won the propaganda war. There's a reason the perception of the German military during World War II was as this unbeatable mechanized force. And that's thanks to the propaganda arm of the Nazis. It's very easy to fall into a similar trap now and buy into the propaganda on social media that every Russian soldier is an evil person, without us understanding that Russian propaganda, that state propaganda arm, is extremely powerful and has been building this event up for over a decade. So I say all that to basically say, in a longer video than what it needed to be, to just bring about the fact that the ideas of the innocent Wehrmacht are gone. But we cannot fall into the trap of going to the opposite side of that and calling every member of the Wehrmacht evil merely by association with the Nazis. This is a movement that has started up in force, and it's very weird to see and run into people who believe it, because you can't really argue with them because they merely claim the moral high ground. And they just bring up these very psychological arguments of, well, since they weren't fighting against the Nazis, they were fighting with them. And that is such a dumb thing to say. And it's dangerous when you have that mentality, because then when you have an event like what's going on right now in Russia versus Ukraine, it becomes even easier to paint every Russian soldier as evil. And you lose all that empathy we so desperately need right now when it comes to being human and understanding that there's a lot of confused people in Russia. There are mothers who will never see their sons again on both sides of this conflict. There are so many people who don't want this war. And there's so many of these conscripts, of these Russian soldiers who do not want to be there but feel like they have no choice. They feel like their families will suffer at home. There's people fighting on the ground for Russia who have been pressured by their family, who have bought into the propaganda that Ukraine is a terrible state. And you have to understand that there are people who believe that they have been sold this propaganda and they have bought into it. If we can so easily forgive our own citizens for falling into the propaganda of the past and committing terrible acts based on that propaganda, why can't we extend that same grace to other people? Is it because it's not us and it's harder for us to perceive that? It's an interesting situation. And it's from here in America, it becomes very easy to talk about with a sense of moral superiority, merely because we aren't experiencing it right now. Emotions are high in Ukraine, and there's a lot of Ukrainians that are probably going to see this video and not be super happy with my discussion on this subject. And I understand. I don't blame them for that. If anything, I fully support their opinions. But it's also important to realize that there is a lot of people in Russia that do not understand what's going on. All they've been told is what the Russian state media wants them to believe. And so their support for this conflict is merely out of disinformation. And if we can forgive ourselves for falling into that trap, we need to be able to extend that grace to other people, because it's a very easy trap to fall into. It's important to realize that the people in Russia who do think that this is a justified war are still weeping for their sons, their brothers, their fathers, who won't ever be coming home. People that are important to them, that won't ever come back home. They've done nothing wrong. They are not morally inferior to us. And yet they just have a different opinion, and that makes them evil. Yes, there are evil people doing evil things in Ukraine. There are horrible war crimes that have happened. And those people need to see justice. They need to, face what they did. Just like during World War II with the Wehrmacht. No, Russia is not filled with Nazis. No, it isn't super comparable to the Nazi regime. But it's a great example of learning from history and being able to have better understanding of what's going on because of your knowledge of a historical event. I wanted to make this video because I wanted to talk about the anti-innocent Wehrmacht myth and how that sparked a polar opposite viewpoint, but I couldn't figure out how to justify making a video about it since it wasn't a lot to talk about. It was a simple discussion that I had had multiple times in Discord, and it took like 5 minutes, and everyone was like, yeah, it's stupid. But with everything going on right now, it went from having that discussion to making an excellent case study into how you can actually learn and grow as a person from history and understanding, historical events. We can learn from the anti-Wehrmacht, the innocent Wehrmacht myth, and how people perceive that now, and how the people in Nazi Germany bought into the propaganda and followed along lockstep, and apply that to the Russian people now and what's going on in Russia now. And it helps us have some empathy when you put it into that context. Now, people are going to disagree with me, and that's perfectly fine. This is a current event going on right now, and there's information that just isn't known, and there's information that is going to be hard to come by. There's a lot of fog of war, there's a lot of emotions, and I fully understand if you think that I'm being a bit, out of touch. I understand that. I understand people who might find some of the things I talk about, very disagreeable. That makes sense, and I'm not holding any of your guys' opinions against you. Obviously, the people who support Putin in the West, like if you're in the West and you support Putin, that merely shows a lack of intelligence, a lack of knowledge of the situation going on. If you're in Russia and you've grown up in Russia and you support Putin, that just means that you've fallen victim to the propaganda machine. There isn't a lot of other information out there, and a lot of Russians have grown up being taught that the West is evil and anything out of the West is just lies to try and discredit Russia. I mean, Russia is still in the Cold War mentality-wise in terms of a lot of the people there, especially the older people. The younger people, not so much. So it's important to recognize that. I do appreciate all the support that I've received over the past couple of years of doing this channel. I didn't think I'd be able to keep up with making videos. It's been really fun to make these, and I'm going to keep doing it. I apologize for the hiatus. I've had a very, very busy past couple months. January was very busy. I mean, I thought that I was going to be able to keep up with making new videos every single day and just keeping up with it, but, like releasing all the record videos, but then that just kind of fell off the cliff, and I was like, oh, well, okay. But I'm back, and hopefully I can keep pumping out videos and keep making new content, and I'm looking forward to it. If you could tell, I don't know if you can actually see it with the light and everything, but I'm wearing a Wolf of 1918 shirt, so if you guys want to support the channel, buy me a coffee or something. I do have a shop with a bunch of merch. I haven't updated in a while, so there's a lot of stuff that's been there for a long time, but that link in the description. If you guys want to join the Discord server, I should be having links in the description now. A lot of the links went dead just because Discord is broken, so I might not even have that in the description anymore, but there is going to be an activated link on my channel, so you guys can keep joining the Discord. There's tons of links down there, so feel free. Again, thank you guys for the support. I really appreciate it. Hopefully new content coming out soon. If you like this video, feel free to leave a like, subscribe, leave a comment. It helps the YouTube algorithm. I've said that in the past couple videos, but it does, apparently. I don't know why. I don't know why YouTube's like this, but it is. So thank you guys for the support. Appreciate it. Here's new content coming out soon. I'll probably be recording a video right after this one, which will be released probably in the middle of next week. So Thanks, guys, and I'll catch you on the next video. Auf Wiedersehen und tschüss.